In the big scheme of things, what difference does it make if a crackpot owns an NBA team? Bernie Goldberg made a great point about all this. This sterling business. He said, take a look at the reaction to it. There is no way this is a racist country. There's not one shred of tolerance for what this guy said, might have said, might be thinking. There isn't one shred of tolerance. There's no way this is a racist country. He's exactly right about that.
Here's the headline. It's primarily his problem, not the country's problem. He's shameful, but does not represent anyone other than himself.
Of course, structural racial discrimination does still exist. We have some evidence. Look at a federal court decision just today in Wisconsin where a judge invalidated a very controversial and very unequal voter ID law. It was signed in 2011 by Republican Governor Scott Walker, and it was invalidated because of, in part, its unfair impact directly on minority voters. The photo ID requirement applies to all voters, regardless of race. However, as we see in the ruling, the requirement places a unique and heightened burden on those who must obtain an ID if they wish to continue voting in Wisconsin. The evidence adduced at trial demonstrates that this unique burden disproportionately impacts Black and Latino voters, as the defendants concede. The plaintiff's evidence shows minorities are less likely than whites currently possessing a qualifying ID. And there wasn't quite as much broad bipartisan or furious condemnation of that. It was, as we mentioned, passed by Republicans. And look specifically at the conservative concept of colorblindness, which is what was used to support the voter ID law and knocking down, of course, the Voting Rights Act last year, where conservatives are saying whatever's out there, all laws should be and all policies should be as colorblind as possible. That's the road to equality.
So you said the key word there, Ari. There's a distinction we should make between racist words and speech and racist practices and policies. We should be focused on the policies and the racial impact of policies that those Republican leaders frankly stand for. So if you think about the Michigan affirmative action case, John Roberts adheres to that ideology of colorblindness that assumes that racism just equals bad speech or words and not policies, where the Wisconsin law that was struck down today, the voter suppression law, one of the things that judge said in striking down is that the state could not produce one example of fraud, which gets to the intent behind the law and the impact of the law. It was designed to disproportionately affect minority voters, low-income voters who tend to favor Democrats. We could go down the list. The minimum wage, the Congress is going to be voting on, disproportionately affects workers of color. Republicans are against that. The fact that 24 states have refused to expand Medicaid disproportionately affects people of color. That's a life and death issue for people. It affects millions of people. So I want to encourage us to get back to the focus on racial policies and the impact of policies versus the racist acts, the racist speech that people say. Yes, we should all condemn it, but the policies affect millions of more Americans.